Part 1. The Man Who Burned His Own Bridges. It began with a ship and a lie. Paris, 1848. While the city shook with the cries of revolution, Clovis Gauguin and his young wife Aline packed their belongings into a small apartment in the 9th arrondissement. They weren't staying. The couple boarded a ship bound for Peru, seeking fortune and escape from the political chaos consuming France. Their son, Eugene-Henri Paul Gauguin, was born in Paris in 1848, but his earliest memories were not of cobblestones or gray skies, they were of Lima. There, in a house filled with Peruvian artifacts, parrots, and the scent of spices drifting through open windows, the boy grew up surrounded by color and heat. Servants told him myths of Incan gods and oceans that could swallow ships whole. When Paul was 6, tragedy came quietly. His father died suddenly of a heart attack on the voyage home to France. The Gauguin family returned to Orleans, where the brightness of Lima was replaced by the dull weight of provincial life. Paul's mother dressed in black. The boy, restless and angry, found himself staring at the sky, wondering why it no longer looked like Peru. By 17, Gauguin fled to the sea. He joined the French merchant navy, and for 6 years he sailed to South America, the Arctic Circle, and ports in between. The world was his classroom, the shifting green of Atlantic storms, the ink-blue stillness of equatorial nights, the strange, raw faces of people far from Europe. When he finally returned to France in his 20s, he took a job as a stockbroker in Paris. The pay was good, the suits were sharp, and he married a young Danish woman named Mette Sophie Gad. They had children, a respectable home, a future. But behind the neatly knotted tie, Gauguin's soul itched. Part 2. The Awakening. In 1873, Gauguin met a man who would change his life, not with advice, but with a simple invitation. The man was Gustave Rosa, a wealthy art collector who asked Gauguin to accompany him to an exhibition. There, Paul saw the works of the Impressionists, Manet, Pissarro, Monet, for the first time. The paintings were alive. Not polished, not posed, but breathing. Light broke into fragments, colors rebelled against rules. Gauguin felt the old heat of Peru rise in his chest. He began painting on Sundays, his only free day, setting up a small studio in the corner of his home. His early works were clumsy but full of raw energy. Pissarro took him under his wing, teaching him to see beyond appearances, to paint what the eye feels, not just what it sees. By the early 1880s, Gauguin's paintings began to sell. His confidence grew. But so did his discontent with the life he had built. The stock market crash of 1882 was the breaking point. He lost his job overnight. For most men it was a disaster. For Gauguin it was liberation. He told Mette he would paint full-time. She looked at him as if he'd gone mad. In truth he had, but it was the kind of madness that fuels revolutions. Paris could no longer contain him. He traveled to Brittany, to the village of Pont-Aven, where the air was thick with salt and the land burned green under summer skies. There, among other struggling painters, he experimented, thicker lines, bolder colors, figures that looked carved rather than painted. But poverty gnawed at him. Mette took the children back to Denmark. Letters between them grew cold. She accused him of selfishness. He accused her of not understanding genius. The marriage cracked and then collapsed. By 1888, Gauguin was alone, poor, hungry, but freer than ever. That autumn, he traveled to Als to join Vincent van Gogh in what was meant to be an artist's utopia. It ended in blood. Part 3. The Sunflowers and the Knife. Als, October 1888. The air was heavy with the scent of turpentine and sunflowers. Vincent van Gogh had invited Gauguin to live and work with him in the Yellow House. His dream of an artist's colony where two men could push painting into a new era. At first, the days were golden. They painted side by side in the blazing Provençal light, their canvases exploding with color, Vincent's swirling, feverish brushstrokes against Gauguin's bold, flattened forms. They talked about Japanese prints, about color theory, about breaking the spine of tradition. But under the surface, tension simmered. Vincent was volatile, anxious. His moods swung like a pendulum between euphoria and despair. Gauguin, colder and more calculating, grew irritated by Vincent's intensity. By December, the Yellow House felt less like an artist's sanctuary and more like a crucible. Arguments flared over everything: technique, philosophy, money. Vincent accused Gauguin of wanting to leave. Gauguin accused Vincent of suffocating him. Then came the night of the knife. The details are blurred by time and madness, but Gauguin's own account is chilling. After a heated argument, he stepped out into the cold to clear his head. He sensed movement behind him, Vincent, pale, wild-eyed, clutching a razor. Gauguin stared at him, unflinching. Without a word, Vincent turned, ran back to the house, and hours later, part of his ear was lying on the floor of a brothel. Gauguin left Arles the next morning. He would never see Van Gogh again. The episode burned something into him, a conviction that he could not share his vision with another soul. From now on he would be an island, and he would find his island far from Europe. Part 4, The Island of Dreams. Paris had grown unbearable, the critics hostile, the debts endless. Gauguin was 43, broke and desperate for escape. He dreamed of a place untouched by European greed, a place where he could strip away the lies of civilization and paint the raw truth of life. He sold what little he had and boarded a ship for Tahiti. The journey took months. When he stepped off onto the shore at Papeete, the air was thick with the scent of flowers and salt. The Pacific stretched endless and blue, the mountains rose like green giants. Gauguin breathed and felt, for the first time in years, that he had come home. But paradise had teeth. The colonial government had already sunk its claws into Tahiti. The capital reeked of bureaucracy and missionary control. Gauguin fled inland, seeking villages where the old ways still lingered. There he found his muses, young women with hibiscus flowers in their hair, skin bronzed by the sun, eyes like still water. He painted them not as European fantasy but as gods and spirits, rooted in myth. Spirit of the dead watching, the seed of the Arioi, where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? These were not mere portraits. They were questions carved in color. He painted barefoot, often shirtless, in a hut that smelled of oil paint and damp earth. Days blurred into nights. His health began to fail, syphilis, malaria, and chronic heart pain, but his obsession burned hotter. In letters to friends in Paris he called Tahiti, the light of my soul, and himself, the savage returned to the wild. But even in this Eden money was scarce. He traded paintings for food, for medicine, sometimes for nothing at all. The more his body weakened, the more his colors deepened. Ochres, purples, violent reds. Gauguin knew he was racing the clock. Part 5, The Edge of the World. Gauguin's body was breaking. His joints ached, his skin erupted in sores, his heart clenched without warning. Yet he refused to return to Europe. Instead he sailed further, to the remote Marquesas Islands, a place even more removed from the civilized world. Here, on Hiva Oa, the ocean roared against black volcanic cliffs, and the jungle pressed close to the few wooden houses. The French colonial presence was minimal, but its shadow still fell across the land. Gauguin became a thorn in the side of the authorities, openly criticizing their treatment of the islanders. He wrote fiery letters, published scathing articles, and defended native customs against missionary suppression. He built a small home which he called Maison du Jour, the House of Pleasure. On its walls, he carved phrases in French and Polynesian, blending defiance and philosophy. Inside, canvases leaned in stacks, half-finished, as if he knew he wouldn't have time to complete them all. His paintings in these years were more symbolic than ever. Eve-like figures, spirits, animals that seemed to carry secret messages. The palette was darker, richer, as though the tropics themselves were aging with him. But illness gnawed at him. So did loneliness. He wrote to friends in Paris, begging for medicine, for news, for money. Few replies came. Yet even in this isolation, Gauguin painted as if eternity depended on it. Part 6, The Final Canvas. May 1903. Gauguin lay in his bed in the Maison du Jour, the humid air pressing down like a heavy curtain. His breath rattled. Outside, the Pacific rolled endlessly toward a horizon he would never cross again. He had been convicted by the colonial court just weeks earlier for libel against a gendarme, his final act of rebellion. The fine would never be paid. His body was swollen with infection, the pain was constant. But even in these last days, a canvas stood on an easel by his bed. On it, a woman sat beneath a tree, her gaze fixed on something beyond the viewer's reach. On the morning of May 8th, a neighbor found him dead. He was 54. The island buried him in a simple grave on a hill, overlooking the restless sea. There were no grand eulogies, no processions, only the sound of waves and the whisper of palm leaves. Back in Europe, news of his death barely made the papers. Only later would the art world begin to understand what he had left behind. A vision that broke the chains of Western perspective, that dared to place the primitive, not below civilization but above it. Today his works hang in the greatest museums of the world. People stand before where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? And feel the weight of its question pressing into their bones. Gauguin once wrote, "I shut my eyes in order to see." Perhaps that's what he was doing on that final morning, closing his eyes to the world around him so he could see the one beyond. And maybe, somewhere past the edge of the Pacific, Paul Gauguin is still painting. Colors no one has ever seen, forms no one has ever imagined, a paradise that even death cannot colonize.